The end is near. The end is near. What it do, Cucksters? It's your boy, the hater, up in this smug, and it's time for another episode of Retro Review. Today, we're going to be reviewing one of the greatest pay-per-views of all time, an easy 12 out of 10, Survivor Series 2001. The song that I just sang was the intro song to this pay-per-view, but I believe it was also the intro song to Armageddon, which, whatever, it fits them both, so deal with it. In addition, after this review, the hater is going to record 25 reasons why Kane is great. The people have been asking for it for a long time, and quite frankly, before I got up to do this review, I went on YouTube and I saw like a clip of Kane. It reminded me how awesome he is, so we're gonna do that right away, because I don't want to forget up in this bitch. But for now, we're gonna be reviewing this pay-per-view, one of the haters' personal favorites. Maybe it's possible that it is my favorite pay-per-view of all time. One of the best things that has ever happened in wrestling. In my opinion, the Attitude Era pretty much ended after this pay-per-view, and quite frankly, wrestling just got worse. This is the peak of wrestling, and it's never been like this, and it never will be like this again. This is an amazing pay-per-view. So, before we discuss the pay-per-view segment by segment, we're going to do a little quick recap, because the storyline of the pay-per-view is, in many ways, much more important than the pay-per-view itself. So for those of you that weren't around back then, that were just a spermatozoa inside your father's balls, the hater's going to get you with the recap. So, basically, long story short, I'm going to make it quick because I want to do like an invasion angle video soon. But anyways, basically, Shane and Stephanie, after a few months of digging around, formed the Alliance. The Alliance is an amalgamation of WCW superstars after Vince McMahon bought WCW, a few ECW guys that debuted, and several WWE guys who had ties to ECW. In addition, several prominent WWF guys like Stone Cold and Kurt Angle had joined the Alliance. Many others as well, but those are the two main ones, right? So, everything culminated, shit hit the fan, and the WWE had too many titles, right? Because they just took all the WCW titles, and this night was the night when all the horseshit ended. We had a bunch of unification matches, and more importantly, we had the 10-man Elimination Survivor Series tag team match. Team WWF versus Team Alliance. If Team WWF wins, Vince McMahon retains control of WWF and WCW, which he rightfully bought. If, however, Team Alliance wins, then Shane, Stephanie, and to a lesser extent, Paul Heyman, who's like their advisor, they are the ones that control both WCW and WWF, and, you know, to some degree, again, ECW, which was more of like an entity, right? So, all of the matches were WWE guys, or WWF guys, I should say, versus Alliance guys. But none of it mattered, right? The whole point of the whole night was to establish certain things. Every match was important, but only the final match dictated who would win, right? So it's not like if one person, you know, wins like the opening match on Heat, then all of a sudden, like, you know what I mean, we have to count who won the most matches. That's not how it was, right? But let's get started, cucks. Christian Cage versus Al Snow is the first match. Christian, not Christian Cage, because this is WWF. Christian is my favorite wrestler of all time, so I really enjoyed rewatching this. Now, back then, he wasn't, I'm not gonna lie, right? Back then, I liked Christian a lot, but he wasn't my favorite. It wasn't until like the early 2000s when he cut his hair and he was on Raw that he became my favorite. But anyways, the match is just a throwaway match. Al Snow hits the snowplow, but it's not enough. Christian gets his foot on the rope. Christian then hits the Unprettier, and he retains the European title. There was a purpose to this, which would become obvious later on in the night. Now, I should also note that Christian had, and historically has had, some of the best theme songs of all time. And this one was no different. This was that theme song that goes a little something like this. Christian! Christian! At last, you're on your own. Dun, It's like an opera song. It was fucking great. After this, we go backstage and we see the Alliance bickering about who is the leader because there are rumors of a mole, right? So Shane and Stephanie think that it might be Stone Cold. So they're like, if you're going to be the mole, tell us now. Like, where the fuck would the mole tell you? But anyways, the point is, everyone's pointing fingers at Stone Cold. Kurt Angle's like, I don't think it's Stone Cold, right? Booker T says, I think it is, dog. So anyways, that's pretty much the entire segment, right? Stone Cold rallies the troops. He does a great job in this promo. And he says, I'm going to like end WWF tonight, right? The underpinnings of this were that Stone Cold has historically hated Vince McMahon, and this is the ultimate way for Stone Cold to flip off Vince McMahon for the final time and send him into retirement, right? However, we go to another segment. Vince McMahon isn't worried. William Regal appears, and he says he'll be happy when the Alliance wins. And next, it's going to be Regal representing the Alliance versus Tajiri, who stuck true to the WWF despite being Regal's protege and despite, of course, being an ECW guy, right? The match was noteworthy for a couple of things. Number one, Tajiri's fucking awesome. Number two, his girlfriend at the time, kayfabe-wise, was Tori Wilson, which I thought was a great pairing. Number three, right, and perhaps most importantly, this really led to nothing, but this was kind of like a somewhat push for William Regal. William Regal had debuted this, like, I don't want to say a gimmick because he was still just William Regal, but this, like, nuanced change where he was this sadist, right? Remember that theme song that he had? The one that's like, dun, dun, where it's just like this really dark music. It's like sinister music, right? So this match really brought that out of him. Regal and Tajiri have a quick match. Tajiri does the tarantula. The whole crowd loses their mind. Tajiri just rules. Tajiri is by far the greatest Japanese wrestler of all time, and it's not even close. Previous to this, William Regal had beaten them in an intergender tag team match after he beat the shit out of Tori Wilson. During the match, Regal hits the Regal bomb, and he also bleeds from his nose, which made him look badass. The Alliance is now up 2-0 because Christian earlier on also had defected to the Alliance. Regal comes back and hits another Tiger Bomb on Tajiri, or Regal Bomb, whatever you want to call it, right? Then Regal leaves, but Tori comes to check on Tajiri. Regal comes back and Tiger Bombs her ass as well. Now, it should be noted, I keep forgetting this, but every time I rewatch this, every like several years, I remember that this pay-per-view is the pay-per-view where they did the motion captures or whatever. They based the moves of WWE 2K, whatever the fuck it was called back then, on the way that people did the moves in this pay-per-view. And they kept those same animations for years. So if you watch this and you've played those games a lot as a child, you're going to notice that the moves look exactly like they did during the video game, right? So the Tiger Bomb was there. William Regal didn't really do it, but he was doing it as a finisher during this time for a few weeks. After this, it's time for Test versus Edge to unify the mid-card belts. One of them is the US champion, the other is the Intercontinental champion. I don't remember which one's who, to be honest, but it doesn't matter. They have a match, and Edge wins with a roll-up, right? Basically, the idea here, this is when it's revealed, kind of, right? That if you're a champion, you're not going to get fired, right? Which kind of gives away the ending, but if we're being honest, the ending to this pay-per-view was pretty clear, right? I mean, of course, there's a chance that the Alliance is going to win, right? But that wasn't really the draw of this pay-per-view. The draw was to see who the mole is and to see who's going to get fired and who's not going to get fired, right? So Edge is now safe by winning the IC title, right? The vast majority of title matches were won by Alliance wrestlers so they could keep their jobs. After this, there's some dissension from the Hardys and Lita. Matt is upset, right? They're saying Matt's not focused, but Matt is the only one that's focused. Champions stay employed, like I just said, and that's their goal. Matt Hardy says, we got to beat the Dudleys to unify the tag team titles because the Dudleys were the WCW champs and the Hardys were the WWF champs, right? And then they also say, Matt Hardy says, Lita's going to win the women's title, so no matter what the fuck happens, we keep our jobs, right? This was the motivation for most wrestlers. And then obviously, they also wanted their team to win. But primarily, the wrestlers were concerned with their jobs, which was, I think, an interesting way to put it, right? So after this, they get ready to go. It's Hardys versus the Dudleys in an excellent cage match, right? This is a great match with a story. The match just keeps going. There's crazy cage hijinks all throughout. Bubba Ray eventually summons Stacy, who was the manager of the Dudley Boys, at the time, the Duchess of Dudleyville, Stacy Keibler. And she says, Stacy, get the table. She's outside of the ring, outside of the cage. So she goes and tries to, like, tamper with the tables and the door, right? Referee Nick Patrick, who is and was the Alliance referee, right? So he was like a bought and sold referee. They even had a match in a previous pay-per-view, Nick Patrick versus Earl Hebner. But the point is, Nick Patrick tries to stop her because I guess he's still a referee, right? And then Stacy Keibler just turns around, starts like dancing a little bit, and pulls up her skirt so Nick Patrick can see her ass. Right? Nick Patrick was like, oh shit, ass. She turns around and she like picks his pocket, steals the key. She opens the door, tables come in, and ultimately this match is one of those cage matches where you can win by pinning someone, I think submission as well, although I've never seen it, and obviously by escaping the cage. The problem, of course, is if both people escape the cage, you win. If one person escapes the cage and the other person's inside, then that person's in a 2-on-1 situation, right? So basically what happens, the culmination of the match is that Matt Hardy is out, Devon is splayed onto a table, and Jeff Hardy climbs the cage. Now, Matt Hardy's saying, come on down, Jeff. So all Jeff Hardy has to do is come down from the cage, right? The Hardy Boys become unified tag team champions, and quite frankly, at that time, they would solidify themselves as the greatest tag team of all time, right? In my opinion, one of the reasons why the Dudley Boys are the greatest tag team of all time, although now it's 50-50 because the Hardys are still going, is because of this match, because they unified the belts, right? So they are the ultimate tag team, you know? Nobody cares about the TNA belts. Nobody really cares about any of the other belts. The only belt that matters is like the WWE and back then the WCW, tag belts, right? All the other tag belts don't mean shit. The AEW ones don't mean shit. The TNA ones, they did mean something after a while because the Dudley Boys had them. You know what I mean? So like that's how you make belts matter. You have important tag teams hold them. So anyways, Jeff Hardy's up. And he looks at Devon on the table, and he thinks, what the fuck? I'm Jeff Hardy. So he does the double guns and does a swanton off the cage onto the table. Problem is, Devon moves out of the way and then covers Jeff Hardy for the win. So basically now, Matt Hardy's like, what the fuck, bro? And Matt Hardy's completely justified in this. This made me a big fan of Matt Hardy because shortly thereafter, the Hardy Boys broke up because we had the brand split, and Matt Hardy became Matt Hardy V1. I thought, honestly, at the time, that people had it wrong, that Matt Hardy was the real star because when they split up, Matt Hardy had the innovative gimmick and Jeff Hardy just remained Jeff Hardy, you know? But that's out of necessity, right? Because Jeff Hardy can just remain Jeff Hardy because he's cool and Matt Hardy is not as cool, so he has to become something else. But nevertheless, both the Hardy Boys, legends in and out as a tag team, as individuals. So now the story of this match concludes, right? That was the theme of the night. A lot of things were concluding, as was the Hardy Boys as a tag team, right? It didn't happen right away, but eventually it did. And this led to the underrated Hardy Boys WrestleMania match where Matt Hardy won, which I thought was great. Anyways, let's move on. It's time for a battle royal. This was a nice little gimmick in the middle of the pay-per-view. Basically, there was a battle royal of all the jobbers, and the winner of the battle royal is guaranteed a 1-year contract, irrespective of whether the Alliance or WWF end up winning in the night. So this is a very important match for that reason, right? As a result of this, it's a bunch of jobbers though, right? But one of them is Test, who earlier lost to Edge. Right before this match, and before the Dudleys match, Test goes up to Stacy and says, hey, maybe we can hang out sometime. And Stacy's kind of like charmed by him because Test is like 6'8" and good looking and muscular, so why wouldn't she be? You know what I'm saying? But this was foreshadowing for Test's, in my opinion, underrated singles run on Raw with Stacy as his manager. Test should have made it to the main event based on that alone because he finally was getting his shot. He cut his dumbass long hair, which quite frankly, long hair is cool, don't get me wrong. But like, it just, the short hair fit him so much better. You know what I mean? Especially considering that it wasn't the 90s anymore and long hair wasn't as edgy, but short hair became cool again. So, you know, same thing, Christian cut his hair. Everybody that wanted to like rebrand as being hip, cut their hair. So Test should have gotten more out of this. But nevertheless, he's in this match, so that's what you get, motherfucks. The match otherwise has a magnitude of jobbers, right? But there's some people there that have had past success, but who pretty much had reached their peak. One of them was Billy Gunn, the one Billy Gunn. I loved the one Billy Gunn. And quite frankly, I really liked his tag team with Chuck Palumbo, who was also in the match. Other people in the match that were noteworthy were Farouk and Bradshaw, the Hurricane, and a few other jobbers. Basically what happens is the people that are doing well are Billy Gunn, Test, Farouk, Bradshaw, then Farouk gets eliminated, and Lance Storm, who in WCW was a triple champion. He was the Cruiserweight, United States, and Hardcore champion in the dying days of WCW. Lance Storm was just like fucking awesome, right? But in WWE, he didn't really do much. But anyways, it's these four guys. At the very end, Bradshaw and Lance Storm get eliminated, and it's the one Billy Gunn and Test. At this point, everybody wants Billy Gunn to win because he's a WWF guy. But Test ends up big booting his bitch ass, Billy bitch ass, out of the ring. Don't get me wrong, I love Billy Gunn. One of my favorites of all time, honestly. But basically, Billy Gunn kicks him in the midsection and goes off the ropes to hit the famouser. But, you know, as he goes off the ropes, Test just chases him like Sami Zayn would and just big boots him. But because Test is fucking Test, the running big boot, which he did perfectly, by the way, was such a good finisher for him. Normally, I don't like big guys with like kick-based finishers, but Test, for some reason, it just fit because his big boot was just so devastating, you know? It just looked like it could take your head off. And quite frankly, the big boot back in the day was a much more commonly used move because you had so many big wrestlers like Kane, The Undertaker player, Test, and other people like that. And Test did a running big boot, which was basically just like a big-ass man. It's the same thing as the Claymore, except he doesn't dive like a retard for no reason. So anyways, he big boots him, and Test now has a 1-year contract. I like the match, but I will say that like this match was such that if an Alliance member won this, then you know that the main event's going to be won by WWF because it just makes sense, right? But again, it didn't really matter. You could still do like a fucking twist ending, which they did do furthermore, but we're going to get to that later, cucks. After this, it's time for the women's match. This was a six-way, basically a six-pack challenge, right? Triple threat rules, meaning that like first pin or submission wins the match. And it was 3 women from the Alliance and 3 women from WWE. From the WWE, you had Ivory, who was back to being a normal person after her right to censor shit. Trish Stratus and Lita, right? From the Alliance, you had Mighty Molly, who was Molly Holly. At this time, Molly Holly was the sidekick of the Hurricane, which was great. Then you had Jazz, who was making her debut, I believe, this night. And there was another woman who was part of the what's it called? Of the Alliance. Maybe Ivory? I don't know. Like, let's see. Who was it? So Lita, Molly, those are, I don't know. It doesn't really matter too much, to be completely honest. Who the fuck cares? I think it was Trish. Let's see. Trish, Jazz. Oh, Jackie. Jackie was there, I guess, as part of WWF. And Ivory must have been part of the Alliance somehow. I don't know why, but that's how that went down, right? So basically, Trish wins, becomes the champion, and saves her job in the process, right? Then it's time for the main event, right? The main event was like an hour long, considering all the things, but it's going to take a long time for your boy to go over this because there's a lot of cool shit that happened. So, first off, Vince McMahon peps up Team WWF. Team WWF is composed of fucking legends. First of all, we have The Undertaker player as the American Badass. Then we have Kane. Together they make the Brothers of Destruction. Then we have the leader of Team WWF, the People's Champion, none other than The Rock. Then we've got, of course, obviously, Chris Jericho, right? And The Big Show, motherfucks. The Big Show. Originally, it was going to be Vince, but then he replaced it with The Big Show, which was a smart move because Big Show is bigger and stronger than Vince. Opposite them was going to be Team Alliance. Team Alliance was led by Stone Cold Steve Austin. In addition, it had the former 5-time at the time WCW champion Booker T, sucker. And of course, the man that won the Olympics with a broken freaking neck, Kurt Angle, who along with Stone Cold had defected to the Alliance. Now, this defection was big because for the beginning of the Alliance and the invasion angle, WWE's hero was Kurt Angle, right? Kurt Angle was the guy that beat Stone Cold for the title. Meanwhile, The Rock was feuding with Booker T, which made a lot more sense because of their stylistic matchup and because of the fact that Booker T was presented, in my opinion, unfairly as a Rock ripoff, right? Because Booker T's signature move was the bookend, which is basically a ripoff of the Rock Bottom. And Booker T did the Spinneroonie, which was one of the only moves at the time that had no purpose. And The Rock did, of course, the most electrifying move in sports entertainment today, the People's Elbow. Right? So that's how they paired it up. Jericho was kind of involved in the WCW title fight as well. And of course, The Undertaker and Kane were a tag team. They were the tag team champions. There's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot of overlap. So in addition to these people, Team Alliance also had, here comes the money, Shane McMahon, cucks. And of course, Mr. ECW himself, the whole damn show, Rob Van Dam, who was presented as the most popular member of the Alliance, because even though he was a heel technically by association, he really wasn't, right? Once the invasion angle ended and RVD just became a normal wrestler, he was presented as just like a face because everybody loved RVD. That's one thing I will say about ECW. Their wrestlers, they could do cool shit, man. You know what I mean? Like, I've said this before, but like, when Rhino just debuted, he came in, he has a spear. It's a regular ass spear, but because it's Rhino and he's fucking awesome, it looks 100 times better. And you hear Paul Heyman on commentary being like, gore, gore. You're just like, oh shit, like, this is a spear, but they're treating it like a finisher. You know what I mean? Like, because back then in WWE, or WWF, nobody did the spear as a finisher. Like, I don't think anybody did the spear as a finisher at the time because even Goldberg, it wasn't his finisher. So Rhino did it as a finisher first. And then Edge started doing it. He had the execution beforehand and all that shit, right? Same thing with RVD. We were used to seeing frog splashes. We had Eddie Guerrero doing his, let's be honest, mediocre frog splash. And we had D'Lo Brown doing his underrated, low-down frog splash. But none of those compared to the 5-star frog splash, which, by the way, has a much better name. Anyways, and also it's like Eddie Guerrero does the frog splash. RVD does the 5-star frog splash. Which one sounds better to you? Exactly. So those were the teams, right? It takes a fucking eternity for everyone to come out, but it makes sense because everyone here is a star. It should also be noted that throughout the night, JR and Paul Heyman were on commentary. JR obviously represented the WWF, and Paul Heyman represented the Alliance. So they were bickering all night. It was pretty great. There was a moment in the Battle Royal where Taz was there, and Taz had recently been like, he didn't defect to WWF, but he was kind of like ousted from the Alliance after Stone Cold just whipped him like in the middle of the ring, But anyways, it's neither here nor there. The point is, throughout the night, Heyman and JR kept explaining that this is a very important night. As a matter of fact, in the beginning of the night, JR says that this is the most important night in the history of not only WWF, but in the history of the industry, right? Because in kayfabe, everything changes after tonight. So as a result of this, it's only logical that everyone gets a full-blown entrance because, again, in kayfabe, half of these people weren't supposed to be there the next day. Obviously, they all found a way back. It goes without saying. But nevertheless, that's how it was. So it's like you're going to give Kurt Angle and Stone Cold their flowers. Even if you hate them, you're going to let them have an entrance because this is a big deal. So the match starts and the match is pretty good, but obviously in the beginning, it's uneventful. Again, watch this match and see when people do their finishers and then go play like SmackDown, whatever, Shut Your Mouth, whatever it was, one of those. Here Comes the Pain. They also had the same animations, and you're going to see that all the moves that were done exactly like this. One example would be Kane's chokeslam, where like back in the day when I would play the game, I could never get it to do the chokeslam such that the person wouldn't end up by the ropes. Because back then you couldn't drag anybody on the ground, so you had to like pin them where they were basically, right? Or not pin them. So you had to like kind of like maneuver Kane where you'd want him to be so the chokeslam ends up in the middle of the ring, And it's because they did the animation that he did today. But anyways, the match starts, right? It's a good match, like I said. The match gets underway and people just trade moves. Nothing really happens here until it's Kurt Angle and the Big Show in the middle of the very ring. Angle, using his Herculean strength, hits the Angle Slam, which obviously was a finisher at least back then, onto Big Show. Booker T tags in as Big Show's getting up and hits the scissors kick, which looks exactly like it did in the video game. Then RVD tags in and hits the 5-star frog splash, but it's not over. Shane tags in and hits the Shane McMahon elbow and pins the Big Show. So while the Big Show was the first to be eliminated and he didn't really contribute much, the Big Show nevertheless needed to take 4 finishers to be eliminated. So he took 4 finisher icons from these guys. So that was his contribution. Immediately after, The Rock comes in and starts beating that ass, right? Pretty good shit, if you ask me. Rock comes in as Shane is dancing and celebrating and proceeds to layeth the smacketh down on Shane McMahon's candy ass. Eventually, The Rock tags in Kane, who chokeslams Shane, like I said in the video game, and tags in The Undertaker, player. At this point, you're expecting The Undertaker to hit the last ride, which was his finishing move at the time. But instead, he does what I call the signature move version of the Tombstone. This was the first and only time The Undertaker did this move, yet this move persisted in the video games forever. It's iconic because in that year's video game, it was just a regular move. It wasn't even a signature move because they didn't have signature moves back then. You had just finishers. So it was a regular-ass move. You could do it any time, right? And he basically gets the person on the Tombstone. Then he like lets go of them. Like Shane McMahon is like holding himself on the Undertaker. Undertaker lets go and does like almost like an RVD, like thumbs down type of thing, right? To signify that he's gonna put Shane down. Then he tombstones him. Then in the video game, he does this like taunt where he moves his arm. In the event, he does the taunt to move his arm in order to make a tag, right? So he makes that tag like a bitch, you know what I'm saying? And guess what happens? Jericho comes in and hits the lion salt. Again, exactly like it was in the video game, eliminating Shane O'Mac. So now it's 4-4. Kane is now in the ring all of a sudden, and basically he's getting double teamed by RVD and Booker. He's holding his own. So you know how that works, right? If you have these multi-man matches and one guy's holding his own, well, eventually the odds are going to overwhelm him, and he's going to get pinned, which is exactly what happens, motherfucks. After this, Kane is there doing his thing, like I said, but basically he's like beating the shit out of RVD and Booker, but RVD, is about to get chokeslammed. Booker T kicks him. RVD hits the frog splash after he kicks Kane in the head, but Kane, no sells it. He gets hit by it, right? But then when RVD goes back to pin him, Kane just kind of grabs him by the throat and gets up to chokeslam him. Booker T kicks him again, and then a brawl breaks out because basically the Kane was getting his ass beat, and The Undertaker wasn't very happy about this, and neither were the rest of his teammates. So a brawl breaks out, and during this brawl, RVD, I didn't like this pin. RVD climbs up to the top turnbuckle and does the diving karate kick thing that he used to do, and pins him with that. I didn't like that. Just pin him after the fucking frog splash if you're going to do it, or do another frog splash, But it is what it is, you know what I mean? They wanted to do this kind of like a quick pin type situation. I just didn't like the way they went with it because he's never pinned anybody else with this move, and Kane is no slouch. But nevertheless, that's how that goes down. You know what I'm saying? I don't make the rules. That's just how it went down. Taker then comes in and starts beating this shit out of everybody. He grabs Kurt Angle and hits the snake eyes on him. Then he hits the last ride on Kurt Angle, and then Booker T comes in with a chair, but Taker big boots him. But then after all this shit, after he's beating that ass, same as Kane, Stone Cold comes in and hits the stunner on The Undertaker and dragging Kurt Angle over him for the pin. Now, not only is The Undertaker, eliminated, right? But this was important because this would suggest that Stone Cold is, in fact, part of the alliance and he is not the Mole. Because why would the Mole eliminate The Undertaker, right? Doesn't make any sense. At this point, the Mole, if it was Stone Cold, he should give the stunner to, Booker T and have Taker pin him or something, right? But that's not how it went down. So all of a sudden now, we find ourselves in a shitty situation, Team WWF, which is obviously who the hater was cheering for as a child. It's The Rock and Y2J versus the entire alliance minus Shane McMahon. The Rock comes in there, starts laying the beating on Booker, but Booker hits the Harlem sidekick. But The Rock gets up, hits a DDT, and pins Booker. But Angle comes in and breaks it up. The Rock then whips Booker into Kurt Angle, who's standing on the apron, and then rolls him up for the pin. Which is what it is. I'm not exactly thrilled that Booker T went down to a roll-up, but this match cannot be 2 hours long, you know what I mean? And quite frankly, it's the only reasonable way for The Rock to get a pin on Booker T or anybody else, for that matter, at this point in the match, because it's 4-on-2. It has to be quick, right? So he does it. He pins Booker T, and that's how that goes down. So now it's 2 against 3 up in this bitch. After this, Jericho gets tagged. Jericho starts beating on RVD and does a running neck breaker for 2. Jericho does some chops. Jericho then hits his bulldog, the one that he would do to set up for the lion salt. Then he goes for the lion salt, but RVD dodges and spin kicks him. RVD with the split-legged moonsault, but Jericho gets his knees up. Jericho then gets up as RVD struggling to get up, grabs RVD and hits the breakdown on him and pins him 1, 2, 3. The breakdown in this particular case was pretty choppy, right? It was kind of botched. For those that don't know, the breakdown is effectively the skull-crushing finale, right? That's what it is. But this was Jericho's move first, and Jericho did it a little bit differently. He wouldn't kind of sweep the leg. He would just put the leg in front and then kind of do it like Jeff Jarrett would do the stroke, where he pulls the guy back and then plants him forward, right? But this was a move, again, that Jericho did as a finisher for literally this event on 2 episodes of Raw and SmackDown. Then afterwards, he just went back to the fucking Walls of Jericho and the lion salt. And then eventually he got the code breaker when he came back. But that's not here nor there, cucks. Anyways, now it's 2-on-2, motherfuckers. Austin then beats on Jericho. The match gets serious. But eventually, The Rock and Angle are in. Rock beats that ass and does a dragon screw. Then The Rock does the sharpshooter, which was one of his, moves. You know what I mean? One of his, signature moves that he would do often. And it's Survivor Series, so something screwy is going to happen. No, it doesn't. Angle just taps immediately. More on that later. This would seem to be, stupid, but it made a lot of sense. Now it's 2-on-1. Austin goes for the Walls of Jericho on Jericho, but Y2J kind of spins him and makes them flip over. Austin kicks him in the head and goes for the diving double X handle, but Jericho counters it. Jericho goes for the lion salt, but Austin gets the knees up. Then Jericho rolls up Austin, but Austin kind of shifts it and pins Jericho in this awkward way. But once again, this is what made the most sense, right? Because if he hit a stunner and he goes to pin him, The Rock's going to break up the pin. So now it's finally time. The Rock versus Austin, 1-on-1 with the great one. Jericho is arguing with the referee, Earl Hebner. But as The Rock and Austin are fighting, Jericho hits the breakdown on The Rock. Jericho has double-crossed the WWF. Austin crawls to cover The Rock. There's a lot of time wasted. 1, 2, The Rock kicks out, cucks this. By the ramp, Jericho is pissed off that his betrayal hasn't led to an immediate payoff. So he makes his way to the ring, but The Undertaker comes back out and stops him. Not physically, but somewhat physically. He goes in front of him and he says, "What the hell are you doing?" And then Jericho starts backing off and they're gone from the match. Back to Austin and The Rock fighting in the ring. They start fighting outside. Austin with a snap spine buster he would do, and he puts The Rock in the sharpshooter of his own. The Rock gets to the ropes, but Rock gets the upper hand on Austin, trying to make him tap out, but then Austin gets to the rope, right? As the match keeps going, there's a part where Austin flips off The Rock and goes for the stunner. The Rock catches Austin's foot, spins it, counters, and stunners Austin. Rock goes for the pin, and Earl Hebner is counting. 1, 2, but the aforementioned referee, Nick Patrick from the Alliance, pulls Earl Hebner off, basically ruining the match. Now, what's his face? Nick Patrick injects himself into the match, and he's the referee, kind of, as Paul Heyman is saying, "Oh, he's an official." Then The Rock gets ready, and he goes for the Rock bottom on Nick Patrick, right? Because he's pissed off. Austin stops him, and then Rock bottoms The Rock. He pins The Rock, and that is 1, 2. The Rock kicks out, jabronis. Austin then hits Nick Patrick out of anger and pulls up Earl Hebner, right? Basically, he just doesn't trust what's his face? Nick Patrick. Austin goes for the stunner, but Rock pushes him into Earl Hebner, and The Rock goes for the Rock bottom. However, as The Rock is going for the Rock bottom, Austin counters this into a stunner, motherfucks, and he pins The Rock. But there is no ref. There is no ref, cucks this. The ref is gone because Austin beat his ass and then was pushed into him. At this point, Alliance member Kurt Angle comes in with the title, and he comes into the match and he bashes Austin, motherfucks. Angle was the traitor. Angle was the mole all along. As Angle bashes Austin, it's one of those title attacks that doesn't flatten the guy out but kind of leaves him loopy for a little bit. As Austin is loopy, he turns around, The Rock is up, Rock bottom up in this bitch, and he pins Stone Cold. 1, 2, he kicks out, just kidding. It was a 1, 2, 3. The Rock celebrates as the last man standing, as the final survivor, as the sole survivor. Vince McMahon comes out and raises his arms in victory as the show goes off the air. 10 out of 10. And by that, I mean 12 out of 10. I almost want to go back and watch the previous episode, the subsequent episode of Raw. The previous one too, honestly, but the subsequent episode of Raw where Vince McMahon gets his power back. I think that's the episode that ends with Ric Flair coming back and saying, "Well, before the thing was over, I bought the rights," or some shit like that. Like, that's not how it works, but whatever, in the world of wrestling, that's how it works. And he's like, "Put it in there, partner." And then then he has the same problem. Now it's like he owns half, he gets SmackDown, and Ric Flair gets Raw. You know what I mean? It's one of those situations, which, quite frankly, was kind of lame, because then that kind of really takes away everything The Rock and friends did. But nevertheless, I mean, it was still an awesome event, And it was a good way to end, in my opinion, one of the best stories of all time that people pretended wasn't as good as it was, because people had this idea, right? They're like, "I want to see Stone Cold versus Goldberg." You're not gonna, all right? So you can't get everything you want, right? Because for every person that wanted to see Austin versus Goldberg, and I was one of them, don't get me wrong, you also have people like me who wanted to see Hurricane versus X-Pac. You know what I mean? To me, that was just as interesting. You know what I mean? To me, seeing Rey Mysterio versus Jeff Hardy was just as interesting as seeing Goldberg and Stone Cold. People will always talk about it "Oh, Sting and The Undertaker was a dream match." Not really. Nobody really gave a fuck about it back then. This became a thing when Sting ended up not joining WWE and went to TNA. That's pretty much all it was. In my personal opinion, none of this shit went down the way it should have gone down, but it was still amazing. People forget DDP was a massive star. Him against The Undertaker in that feud was great. I mean, obviously DDP fell off after that, but DDP was he was a big guy. He was strong looking. He was good at wrestling. He was good at promos. There was a lot of good things that happened from this. It didn't necessarily go in the most optimal way, but this does not detract from the fact that it's one of the greatest stories ever told in the history of wrestling. In my opinion, the real stars of the invasion angle were not Stone Cold or The Rock or Jericho or Kurt Angle or Booker T. The real stars were the entities, the WWF, right, as represented by Vince, and WCW, as represented by Shane and Stephanie. In my opinion, this was a better representation than if like Bischoff was the owner. That would be stupid, right? It would make a lot more sense to have like the family situation there with Vince. This was like just completely amazing. So, and this was a good way to end this, right? This was better than all the other pay-per-views, in my opinion, during the invasion angle. Except for maybe you can make the argument that the first one was better, but the main event was like, it was like DDP, Booker T, and the Dudleys versus like Rock, like the Brothers of Destruction and like Angle or something. You know what I mean? Like it was like completely stacked the other way. But that was just amazing. The first one was amazing because you're finally seeing like Booker T in WWF. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's happening, motherfuckers. It's actually happening on a pay-per-view. You're seeing some matches that you never thought you'd see. So with that being said, take care of yourselves and look out for that Kane video. Cuxties.